Each week we have an in-depth conversation with one of the key players in the legislative process. This week we welcome Senator Jeremy England, a Republican from Van Cleve, who represents District 51, covering much of Jackson County. Senator England was first elected in 2019. Today he serves as chair of the Senate Elections Committee and vice chair of Ports and Marine Resources. Senator England, welcome to At Issue.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Glad to be here.
So let's start with the committee you were chair of. And through that work have brought a couple of bills, out of committee, some substantial bills. Let's start with campaign finance reform, because I know that, the president of the Senate, Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, right. That was one of the things that I think he was looking at coming into this session. And I know that during especially his primary campaign, ran into some questions about campaign finance reform. Right. First, what were the conversations like between him and you heading into this session as chair of elections, and knowing that that kind of any type of reform or looking at campaign finance was going to have to come through your committee?
That's right. And look, anybody that watched that primary election knew that there may have been some things happening within the gray areas of campaign finance, and so there was some reform needed. And it's a big bill. But talking with the Lieutenant Governor, I got his ideas on this, and of course he had a plan ready to move forward. But I also talked with the Secretary of State's office, who also had a plan, and the Attorney General's office, who had a plan. So this bill that we have that we're working through the Senate right now is actually kind of a Frankenstein type bill, where we've taken parts from each of the three areas, which is great. I really like a chance to do that, because that's three very smart individuals that know what they're looking at, know what they're talking about, and we like some things out of the Secretary of State's office's campaign finance reform plan, some out of the Attorney General's office. So it's really a conglomerate of all of those ideas coming in, and surprisingly, a lot of the ideas were the same. It was pretty easy for them to look at it and see where we needed to close up some gray areas. But that's kind of where the conversation started. It was a very large bill with a lot going on in it, and so now that's where we are now.
A lot of over 50 pages, I believe, or maybe a little more than that.
62 the last time I looked.
Okay, all right. Yeah, and like you said, kind of an omnibus bill. A lot of stuff packed in it.
It is.
Looking at it, some skeptics, I say that some of these things don't necessarily reform, campaign finance laws, but instead, looking at the nuts and bolts of it, at least make it easier for the offices that are involved in enforcing campaign finance actually have the tools to do that. So what was kind of that approach, making sure, because I know, during the primary, there seemed to be a lot of finger pointing between the AG and the Secretary of State, not necessarily like you did, but who's going to do this? Who's going to actually, take up, some of these violations? So how much was that enforcement piece a part of these conversations?
It's definitely a very important part. As a matter of fact, we changed the word may a lot of times in the bill to shall, because, anytime you've got these campaign finance issues and complaints that are filed, you don't want to have any one entity making a political decision if they're given the option to do so.
And that's what that may that does, right? It kind of gives some leeway, some I guess some discretion, rather than just being an objective,
That's right. And look, that's not to say that was happening. We just, since we're looking at it, we saw that as an issue, regardless of who's in the Secretary of State's office or who's heading the Attorney General's office. We wanted to take that option out of there. So that was a very important piece. And it was unclear, who does the investigation, who takes on the complaints, then where does that go from there? Does it get handed over to the Attorney General's office, and does the Attorney General have an obligation to do something? So we try to address that in this campaign finance reform bill, those obligations and duties of each of those offices. And I'll tell you that even the Ethics Commission had a large part to this, and we've taken them out for the most part. They still will hear, they still can be asked for opinions, and if a sitting Secretary of State has a complaint filed against them, the Ethics Committee would hear that. But otherwise, we've put all of that, all of the complaint filing process, the rules to be looked at, fines, that all goes to the Secretary of State's office. If there's a criminal issue that needs to be prosecuted, that's where the Secretary of State turns that over to the Attorney General's office, and we clarified that those two offices should and would be required to communicate back and forth now during that investigation, whereas previously there was some questions as to whether the Secretary of State's office could get involved or have the information on a criminal side of.
So it sounds like some of those roles and responsibilities are at least cleared up a little bit in this new legislation.
That's right. And that's what we're trying to do, and also trying to make sure that we when we have a case that needs to be prosecuted, that it goes forward.
Okay. One of the pieces, like we've mentioned, this was a large bill, lots of pieces. One of the pieces that that came out during the floor debate via an amendment was the electronic data, or the electronic filing to create this searchable database. I think the Secretary of State, something the Secretary of State's asked for, but that amendment passed. Is that something that's just kind of let that piece set aside for now and revisit it, or is there hope throughout the rest of this deliberation process to bring that piece back?
I hope we can get it back in, Michael. And I tell you what, so the bill has a reverse repealer in it, which of course for listeners who may not know, a reverse repealer just means that the bill says it goes into effect, but it's repealed the day before. It's really just a mechanism that always comes out of a bill. It allows us to work on something so complex for the entire system, or for the entire session. I hope that comes back in. Now, what did not come out was that the Secretary of State's office is required to go ahead and set up a online database where you can go file online, and that is searchable. What came out was that candidates are required to file online.
Requirement, yeah,
right.
The requirement.
And Senator Hobb Bryan, he raised a concern about folks who may not have internet access yet. There was also a concern from Senator Joey Fillingane on whether or not, if the system fails, what do these individuals do? So I think once we address that issue, and as a matter of fact, just this morning and yesterday I was talking with the Secretary of State about this, and he's trying to figure out how we can get that back in. He wants that to be in as well. And I look, that's a very big component of this bill when it comes to transparency, is having a searchable online database where you can go search my name, or you can search a contributor and find out who's donating to our candidates and where our candidates are spending their money. Right.
And then again, huge bill. It's gonna, you have the reverse repealer in there, so we know it's gonna have to be revisited. It's also gonna have to go across the Capitol, right?
That's right.
And a bill this big, surely the House is gonna want to do some things to it, even though we haven't heard as much from the House about campaign finance reform. So you're a committee chair, looking ahead and anticipating conference. What do you think that's going to be like? And do you have conferees kind of already in mind?
Yes, we do. And my counterpart in the House, Representative Noah Sanford, he's very good to work with. We had a meeting and we talked about bills we expected to come to our committees. And he said, look, y'all take campaign finance reform on early, knowing that was Lieutenant Governor's one of his main issues, and he took some others. So we're ready to go once we get it over there. And look, as a matter of fact, when we had this committee substitute come out in committee, we debated it, we put the reverse repealer in it, and earlier this week I printed out a hard copy of it, handed it out to my committee members, said, hey, mark this up. I know this is going to end up in conference, but let me know what your concerns are, and let's keep, because we've got some really smart people in that committee, and really in the entire Senate that are looking at that. The Attorney General's office still looking at it, Secretary of State's office still looking at it, and then of course we'll have discussions with our House members. So hopefully when we get back, I don't know if it'll be, when we get to the end, I don't know if it'll be 62 pages, 100 pages, 2 pages, whatever we end up with. I want to get as many of these people that are just intelligent on this issue, looking at this and helping us reform this in a good way.
Okay. Also coming out of your committee and out of the Senate is a measure to extend, or actually really just create, a 15-day early voting period. So just to clarify, how is this different than the current, the early absentee we have, and why take this up now? I mean, especially to be fair, this early voting has been a Democratic kind of policy priority for a long time. But I mean, you're a Republican chair of elections. How is this different, and why did you decide that this is a priority for you?
Well, and you almost hit on it there when you were asking the question, was the no excuse part, right?
Right.
So let me just touch on that part first. This is different from in-person absentee ballot voting because you don't have to have an excuse. You don't have to. And look, what we have in Mississippi now, folks that go in, you have 45 days to go in and request an absentee ballot in person. And you know, if you're not going to be out of town, sometimes even your circuit clerk will kind of, you know, wink and nod at you and say, hey, we need you to tell us you're going to be out of town, or we can't give you this. And that's a 45-day period. And then you have, you know, number one, you get your ballot, you sign, you have to put it in the envelope, you have to sign across the flap. There's just so much there's so many things that go on.
Even though
with
you're sitting right
absentee
there in the clerk's office.
That's right. And when we looked at this, number one, we know that Mississippians are very busy people. We have people working shift work on election day. We have our doctors and our nurses in the hospitals. Our teachers are super busy. Our manufacturers on the line, and sometimes they work a good ways away from where they vote. And then they also have to, you know, a lot of them have children they have to deal with. So we wanted to find a way to make this convenient, but also maintain the integrity and the security of our elections. And the way we do that in this bill is you have to show up in one location. It's your circuit clerk's office. You have to show your photo ID just like you do on election day, and they print you an actual ballot from your precinct, and you fill out the ballot, and then you put it in a Scantron, again, just like election day. And what I like about that is if you either fail to vote on something, or that Scantron has a mark that it doesn't know if it's trying to read it as a vote or not, it'll kick it back out to you and give you a chance to rectify that in person. Feed it back in, and your vote has been cast, and then they don't get read or they don't get tabulated until election day at 7 p.m. It's just such a very good, secure system that I think is Mississippians are going to really appreciate having the opportunity to do that.
And just to clarify, a key difference in that is that those in-person absentee ballots that people maybe have been accustomed to doing, those remain sealed until election day, right? So if a voter did have a mistake, they really have no chance to rectify it right now.
That's right. If there's an issue on the ballot and the committee looks at it, they can toss a ballot, which we just don't like seeing. And I'll tell you another thing I don't like seeing is having these ballots counted after election day. When you feed these into the Scantron, your vote will be counted after 7 p.m. on election day, and so we'll know. Look, one of the biggest problems I think we have that's perceived in our election system is when we have votes counted after election day.
Right.
This will get rid of that. And look, this bill does also get rid of in-person absentee ballot casting. So you're only going to have your 15-day window for showing up in person. You still have mail-in absentee ballots.
Right. And that 45-day period is still the same.
That's right. 45 period for your mail-in request absentee ballot is still the same, but this gets rid of that in-person part of it. And I think it's going to add more integrity and security to our system, in my opinion.
Well, and detractors, you know, I've heard already some detractors kind of point to that single location. As you know, some people live far away from their county seat, their circuit clerk's office. They live much closer to their voting precinct, but maybe they can't get to their voting precinct on election day. I mean, is there an appetite to see how this system goes and then build upon it, or is there more of a desire to kind of keep it in this one place?
Yeah, right now, Michael, we're just going to keep it in one place. Again, security is very important. Having election officials, your circuit clerk's office has people who understand what's going on. They're going to be in the system. And look, we still have election day. You know, and to some degree, people still need to have understand that option, that your precinct's going to be open on election day, and that's closer to you. But in order to maintain that integrity, I feel like it's important for us to keep it there in the circuit clerk's office.
And this 15 days is how does that factor in weekends?
So you get a Saturday, just like you do an in-person absentee ballot voting, which I did last weekend, since I'll be here next Tuesday for election day. Yeah, it's the same. Well, Saturdays are the same.
Okay,
so Monday to Friday, and then Saturday, I think it's 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. on those Saturdays, not on Sundays. So really, we call it 15 days, but it's actually 13 days, I guess, taking those Sundays out.
Okay. All right, and so we spent a lot of time talking about elections. That is the committee that you're chair of. You're also vice chair of Ports and Marine Resources, and you are, from Van Cleve, so you're one of those coastal senators.
Right.
It's something that I want to ask you about that I know came out of. I think it was a bill presented by Senator Thompson, but came out of Ports and Marine Resources, and I think it's top of mind, at least for a lot of people on the coast. Because the Mississippi Sound Coalition has just filed a pretty significant lawsuit against the Army Corps of Engineers. Since 2019, there's been a lot of concern, trepidation about the state of the Mississippi Sound when it comes to those marine ecosystems. And so, you represent that area. What are you hearing, and why is the creation of this task force that Senator Thompson's bill creates an important piece?
Yeah, so it's extremely important. And Senator Thompson's my desk mate. He's from over in the Pass Christian area, Harrison County, a little bit of Hancock County. Very good friend of mine, and I'm so glad he's the chairman of this committee because he's just very smart when it comes to this type of thing. And what he noticed early on, and what we were all hearing around 2020, was after the Bonnie Carey opened up with they let this huge amount of fresh water into our Gulf, and it just really devastated our ecosystem there, which has worked very bad times. Of course, we had the BP oil spill, several years before that, and then we're dealing with this. What this study committee is going to be able to do is show the negative impacts of opening just the Bonnie Carey and for how long, and what that influx of fresh water does to our ecosystem in South Mississippi. It hurts our speckled trout that come in and they'll spawn in those areas. Who knows how many generations of speckled trout were hurt during that. The oyster issue that we've been hearing for a long time. We're trying to get our oyster beds back because oysters, they're a natural filter, so our water system relies on those oysters. It killed this fresh water, and it tends to be warmer water too, and it's not a good thing. And the Army Corps of Engineers, I believe they had, the last time they wrote a report on this and studied this in depth was after the 1927 flood in Mississippi. And of course, since then, we've had new locks and dams put up. We've had new diversion areas put up, new spillways, and they need to go back and look at this and see what other options are available and when they should open each of those spillways in a way that's not destroying our ecosystem. Right. Because our fishermen and our oyster fishermen down on the coast, they rely on that. Our shrimpers, that's a huge industry. And because we're lagging on the best information available before we do this, we're hurting those people's livelihoods.
And the Army Corps of Engineers is actually undergoing a 5-year kind of period right now to study. In fact, they were in Base St. Louis a couple of weeks ago. So I know that process is happening, but also know a lot of people on the coast have felt that their voices haven't been heard at that level. So, what kind of, is there a pipeline with this task force? As far as hearing from locals and trying to communicate that to the next level?
There is, and that's one of the main components of it, because we've got, most of these spillways are in Louisiana. So Louisiana they have seats at the table when it comes to how to look at this issue that we're having. We want a seat at the table. So it starts here. We fund the studies, and Senator Thompson's authored bills to let some of those studies go forward. And look, they're showing, yes, this is devastating your coast when you open this. And it's hurting all the way over to Mobile Bay. So, I think we've got our sister state there can maybe jump in with us too and say, listen, we need seats at the table. We need to talk about how this affects the entire Gulf Coast. And then these people, Mississippi Sound Coalition, they're able to go up to Washington, D.C. They're able to show these studies. Here's data that says what's going on and why we need to look at it. So there's a pipeline of people all the way from our local governments down in Biloxi and Pascagoula and Gulfport, all the way across our coast, all the way up to Washington, D.C., through of course, our legislature here, to get everyone involved and get everybody kind of pointing in the same direction that we need to talk about this, and Mississippi needs a seat at the table when it comes to this.
And speaking in that same vein, and you mentioned like these spillways are controlled in Louisiana. The lieutenant governor of Louisiana, I believe, has become a friend and an ally of a lot of of coastal Mississippi. Have you had any interaction with him, and how is that going?
Yes, so he came and talked at a hearing. I wasn't able to be here at the hearing, but I was on Zoom with the hearing, and yes, he's got a great relationship with our lieutenant governor. They've talked about this, and look, Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hoseman was really big on getting this moving as well. He's always kind of been a friend of the coast and watching that particular issue. But yeah, the Lieutenant Governor from Louisiana, he understands that. Look, the Mississippi River has changed, for millions of years historically, and there's a tendency for it now to want to go back west, and there's an option there to allow that water to flow through. And of course, in Louisiana, their concern is they want to see their land redeveloped because they're losing so much of their land through the way the water is rolling out. And according to the Lieutenant Governor of Louisiana, if we divert this water in a different way, I believe it's down the Atchafalaya Basin. They'll have we'll have more silt and more development of their property. So he's been a very big ally on it because he understands the science behind it, and that's very big for us.
All right. We've talked a few issues. What haven't we discussed that you'd like to articulate and bring to top of mind as we have this conversation and for our listeners to hear?
Okay, yeah, Michael, and I appreciate that opportunity. A bill that we just passed out of Education Committee, and I'm not on the committee, but I presented a bill last week that passed that deals with dyslexia therapy programs in Mississippi. And when you look, I've talked with my friend Tracy Barrientos in Ocean Springs. She has the Lighthouse School for Academy for Dyslexia. And so she deals with this. She pointed out to me that, as many as 50% of our NASA scientists have dyslexia. But the downside of this is as many as 50% of our prison population also have dyslexia. Okay. So these are high IQ individuals that didn't get remediated into the system. So they have to be taught how to read differently. If we're not catching them early, say in the third grade, they're either labeled as not being smart, being lazy, being a troublemaker. And where does that lead to? Right. And here in Mississippi, if we can put more dyslexia therapists in our schools, in our public schools, that can remediate this issue on site, I think we're going to see a big turnaround. And this is a 10 to 15 year deal. We're not going to see it immediately, but look, we might be able to see where we can start taking funds out of our corrections side of things and putting it back into education, which would be wonderful. And so we can do that here in Mississippi by allowing more dyslexia therapists into our schools that have been trained in other locations. Right now it's kind of a narrow route to get dyslexia therapists into schools, and what this does, it allows for more training to be available for them to show up here in Mississippi.
And I mean, it sounds in principle a lot like what the Senate's trying to do with healthcare, and let's put our money towards preventative measures, things on the front end. Because there are, at least the argument is that it's actually more fiscally responsible to be preventative than it is to try to correct things on the back end.
That's right, and that's always the case. Look, even students that may fail a grade, for them to repeat, it's way more expensive for a student to repeat a grade than it is for them to have this remediation and these options available to go forward. So yes, an ounce of prevention really saves us in the long run when we get to where the problem actually hits, and it's too late a lot of times to remediate those issues.
All right, and lastly, I've seen you speak on the Senate floor a few times. It stands out sometimes when you speak from the floor because of the bright pink microphone cover. Is there a backstory there that you'd like to share?
Well, so I think my friend Senator Tyler McConn, he's kind of our microphone fairy that I think has been putting those on. But I'll tell you, pink has been my color since this last lieutenant governor election. I was called out for raising money for breast cancer awareness, and the picture was me in a pink onesie with a tutu on that I used to raise money for breast cancer awareness. It was kind of used in a nefarious kind of way, or attempted to use that way. And I tell you what,
during the primary,
that's
correct?
Right, during the lieutenant governor's primary. I turned that around, and I raised $8,000 more by doing that. And my grandmother is a breast cancer survivor, so I would do this again tomorrow if I could. But yeah, so the pink microphone definitely has a little bit. It's a little bit more at home on my microphone than maybe some others.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, we'll end it there. Senator England, thank you for joining us on that issue. For an extended version of this interview with Senator Jeremy England, please subscribe to our At Issue podcast.
Thank you, Mike.